We're on top of a mountain, and I can't think of a better place to talk about the next part of our study of mental health and depression and anxiety, because it's exactly someplace similar to this where God speaks to Elijah, and he hears that still small voice on the mountain. We're going to talk about the next thing that God addresses with Elijah as he is in that low point in his life following the great victory on Mount Carmel. Elijah goes into the desert. And 1 Kings chapter 19 tells us that he laid down under a juniper tree. And the Bible tells us that as he lay, he slept under that tree. But an angel came and touched him, and he said, "Elijah, arise and eat." And the angels prepared food for him, delivered from God. And after he eats, he lays down and rests again. And then he wakes up, and the angel wakes him up, and he eats again. It's God's reminder to Elijah and to us of the physical element of our depression and our anxiety. That when we are in these moments, that very often there is the element of our physical need. That we must be refreshed physically. When I talk with folks who are challenged in this area, one of the very first things I will often ask, are you getting enough rest? Generally, the first thing they will say is, I don't have time to rest. I've got too many things. In fact, the things that are creating the anxiety and causing depression are the things that keep me awake, and I can't sleep, and I need rest, and they have to find some way that they can be refreshed physically. As we think about that, it's important to remind ourselves that even though our physical is not the only cause of our mental weariness and our mental health, it certainly affects us. The physical can affect us mentally, and then the mental can begin to affect us physically. I was talking with someone recently who's struggling with a physical infirmity. They have problems with their knees, and he told me how he lacks purpose in life because he can't get out and do. And he needs to get out and do to strengthen his knees, but he can't do, and so he gets discouraged, and he lacks purpose, and he doesn't feel like getting out of the house. But the more he stays in the house, the more discouraged he becomes, the less purpose he feels like he has in life. And so he grows weaker. And so his physical is affecting his mental, and his mental is affecting his physical, and it's going in a cycle. And it begins to affect us spiritually as well. That's the case that Elijah was in. After all the exertion of that great moment, after 3.5 years of standing for God, now he feels the physical weariness. Let me give you 3 principles that will help us in being physically refreshed. The first of these is adequate rest. Rest is something that God has wired into us to need. Our bodies are refreshed as we are physically refreshed, as we are sleeping and resting. God renews us and regenerates. That's why Elijah takes this nap. He needs that rest. As we think about this rest and this need for it, we think about the idea of sleep. Sleep is important. Sleep is something that God has given to us. Someone has said that God gives us sleep. It's God's gift, and it's God's reminder that we are not Him, and that we sleep because He does not. The psalmist said, "He that keeps you will neither slumber nor sleep." Because God stays up all night, I don't have to. Now, the problem is that very often the problems that cause our anxiety and our depression can be the very things that cause our sleeplessness. And that sleeplessness begins to amplify our depression and our anxiety. And we get into that cycle, and we lay down at night, and all those problems begin to cycle through our minds. And the video of what's happened, or what somebody's done to us, or what we've experienced, or what we think might happen, begins to loop through our minds and causes us to not rest and not sleep as we should. There's a long list of negative effects, both physically and mentally and emotionally, and I know that it has to affect us spiritually as well. Along with sleep goes the idea of rest, something that God has given to us. On the 7th day, after 6 days of creation, God rested. And He didn't do that because He was tired. He did that because He wanted to model for us and give to us a Sabbath. In Exodus chapter 20, Moses said that as God rested on the 7th day, the people were to rest on the Sabbath day. This was not a restrictive commandment, but to a nation of slaves who had never experienced any kind of rest or leisure, it was a gift from God to say, here is a day for you to renew your bodies, for you to rest. We live in a time that's constantly in action. We are frenzied, even in our leisure. And we are pushing and we're striving, and we never are at rest. Leisure, as God intended, is not just lying around in our pajamas doing nothing, but it is a holistic rest that rests our body, our soul, our spirit, and our mind. It's very interesting that God not only commanded rest and mandated it in the Old Covenant, but in the New Covenant, Jesus modeled it for us. His physical body, just like he ate when he was hungry, he drank when he was thirsty. The disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee in the boat. The storm comes up. They're fearful for their lives. Where is Jesus? He's in the back of the boat, asleep. Why? Because he was tired and he needed rest. And he modeled that concept of rest for us. A second part of this refreshment is the appropriate nutrition, the appropriate food. Now, the Bible is clear. God uses food to point us to him, to our need for him. The food teaches us about the redemptive work. Jesus says, as a corn of wheat falls to the ground and dies, bread comes from that. Life comes from that because it dies. And he was speaking of his death and life. It reminds us of our deep need for God and our deepest satisfaction in him. Now, the Bible is clear that we are to eat in moderation in how and when and what we eat and even why we eat. It's to be in moderation because that is what is healthy for us. Paul said in 1 Corinthians that we are to do all. Whether therefore you eat or drink, you do all to the glory of God. How do I eat to the glory of God? Well, I eat to the glory of God when I eat with a thankfulness that God has provided it for me. When I eat with a satisfaction that knows that God gave that to me to be enjoyed. And when I eat with a deep satisfaction in him that knows that what I have is sufficient and I don't need to overindulge. Not only good rest, eating appropriately, but also activity. Elijah gets up after he slept and after he's eaten, and he runs. He is able to be active. God now has something for him to do. We are commanded. We were not created to be creatures of idleness. And God has given us labor and work. Adam was designed in the Garden of Eden to be at labor and be at work, to be active. This takes many forms, but it is for our benefit. And nothing is more helpful, often to our minds, to our emotions, to our depression and anxiety, than to engage in some activity, particularly if it's outside where you can enjoy the beauty of God's creation. So as we think about these things, let me just quickly give you 3 principles that will help us understand these. I could give you a whole lot of, there's lists everywhere of techniques to use to get more sleep, change the environment, listen to music, drink herbal tea, whatever it might be. But what I want you to do is see these principles, these biblical principles that will help us understand these 3 things to be able to better implement them into our physical refreshment. Principle number 1, these things are gifts from God. They are not part of the fall. They are not part of the curse. They have been affected by the curse, but they are gifts from God for our benefit. Don't feel guilty about getting the rest that is needed. Don't feel guilty about enjoying appropriate levels of food. Don't feel guilty about taking time to walk away from your work and take a walk, to spend time with your family, to do something. Secondly, we do these things in balance. Extremes in either direction with these can become harmful, not just sinful, but harmful to us as persons. Extremes, too much sleep or not enough sleep. Too much activity or not enough activity. Too much food or not enough food. All of those are out of balance. And then thirdly, this takes persistence. It takes doing this over and over to work our way. We did not get to where we are overnight. And the physical element of what is affecting us mentally must be changed with time. Be persistent in it. And then as we think about this, do this on a daily basis because preventative is much better than curative. Taking care of it ahead of time, keeping ourselves in a healthy place is better than trying to bring ourselves back. I'll close with this one thought that I think is key and important for us. Don't feel guilty about refreshing yourself physically. Don't feel guilty about taking care of your body. It is not selfishness, but care for our bodies is taking care of the temple of the Holy Spirit.